Kim van Kets, it's really good to be talking with you. I'm going to be seeing you at the end of the month with about 250 other BizNews community members, where you're going to be following up on what your husband, Peter, did at the previous BizNews conference and opening it for us and hopefully leaving everyone in a real good mood.
Well, that's certainly my plan, Alec. I hope I don't disappoint. Yeah, thanks so much for having me. It's wonderful to be chatting to you this morning, and really looking forward to the conference at the end of the month.
And it really is interesting to have a power couple. I mean, we talk a lot about power couples in business and power couples in other areas of life, but in this field, in this endurance field, and I really would love to know how you decided to also get involved. Because if you go back a little bit, in Peter's first book, your husband's first book, where he talks about rowing across the Atlantic and going to the South Pole, etc., it didn't seem initially, anyway, as though this was a area that you'd be that interested in going into endurance. You're a lawyer from Stellenbosch University.
No, well, actually, Alec, that's not entirely true. When I met Peter, we were both already very involved in long distance ultra type events, and I think we just enabled each other over the years. We've become increasingly hectic because we've been almost given permission to do so. Certainly, when he first rowed across the Atlantic, I had no immediate plans to do anything too hectic, because when he made the decision to do so, I was pregnant with our child. So I first had to, give birth to her, and then wait until she was viable before I set off on my own expedition. So, shame. Hannah has been almost a baton that over the years Pete and I have handed to and fro. Okay, so here's Hannah, and I will set off on one of my races or expeditions, and then I come back and hand her, she gets handed over, and then the other person heads off. So I really think that Pete and I, because we get it, because I understand why he wants to do what he does, and he understands why I need to do what I do, I think we've just given each other permission to do increasingly, difficult and risky things sometimes. And I'm so grateful, I'm so grateful for that. I'm so grateful, especially that he hasn't wasted time trying too hard to protect me, because I think we spend so much time trying to keep the people that we love safe, that we actually diminish them. And I think I'm grateful that him and I have avoided that in our relationship.
How did you meet each other?
How did we meet each other? No, we met each other very briefly on the steps of Sachs School in Cape Town, where Peter was a teacher, and I was actually, I had a boyfriend at the time, and I spent a long time trying to introduce him to one of my best friends, because I thought, wow, why waste a fantastic man? And then, I don't know, like a year or so later, we had just been friends for the last year, and a year or so later, Pete came up to visit the Eastern Cape, and I took him to explore the Eastern Cape. We went hiking and paddling, and it was, the Eastern Cape was really performing. The birds were diving, and the westerly was blowing, and the rivers were sparkling. And I think he fell in love with, he fell in love with the Eastern Cape, and then with me, in that order. So we've been married for about 22 years now, to our surprise. Yeah.
And you still live in the Eastern Cape?
Yes, we do. We actually, I was just telling Lucy, we moved here more or less when we got married. So 22 years ago, we were living in Cape Town. I originally come from the Eastern Cape. I grew up in the rural areas of the Eastern Cape. But I was working in Cape Town, and Pete and I made a decision to come back here. and everybody went, great career move. You know, what could you possibly be planning to do in East London? And yeah, well, it was a lifestyle move more than a career move, and it's been wonderful for us and our family.
Kim, rural parts of the Eastern Cape, are you 1820 settler stock?
I'm mainly actually German stock. If you remember the history, the 1820 settlers were brought in to form a bit of a buffer, and they didn't do a very good job. They all hightailed it to Grahamstown to start printing presses. And then I think the more sort of robust German folk were brought in to pick up the pieces. And I'm sort of a combination of the two, but probably more German ex-soldier than British settler. A bit of a mixture of the two.
It's so interesting when one goes back into the genes and the forefathers, and certainly from the Eastern Cape. I'm privileged to be married to a girl from Somerset East, so I get it. I kind of get the athleticism and the can-do attitude. But when you decided to go on your first big adventure around the perimeter of South Africa, and I was looking at those numbers, it took 5 months. You had to travel 45 kilometers a day. It's an incredible challenge. Why did you decide on that?
Well, I didn't initially decide on that. I'm a runner, Alec. First and foremost, I love the simplicity of running. And so I've always been incredibly inspired by the thought of just running over the horizon. I hate doing out and back runs because the second half is always boring. So I'm always so motivated to go around just the next corner, just the next corner, just the next corner. So I had been planning always to do some massive run. And the idea of running around the perimeter of South Africa came to me. And initially it was going to be a run. And, you know, there's not one answer to the question, you know, why would you want to do that? I want to do it because I love running. It is the ultimate adventure, but mainly because I just love this beautiful country of ours. And the thought of getting to sweat on every bit of its border, you know, I wanted to go and check the perimeter. Yeah, so initially the plan was that it would be a run. And then I did the maths and I realized that it was really far and that to run the whole way would simply just take too long. Because the reason I had 5 months in which to do it is because Peter had been gone for 5 months, for a total of 5 months when he did his 2 rows. So I had basically a 5-month credit balance in which to go and do my own expedition. So I had to keep it to 5 months because if I didn't, that would put Pete back in credit. And, you know, that's always particularly dangerous. It's not a situation one wants to be in. And so then I realized that running the whole way would just take too long. And that's when the idea of turning it into a big triathlon, which would speed it up a little bit, came to me. And then I was running one day and the idea of Try the Beloved Country, you know, came to me as the name for my expedition. And I took that as confirmation that a big triathlon around the border was the right thing to do. So, yeah, so I think I'd almost been training for something like that my whole life. And the idea had been brewing for a long time, but initially it was just going to be a run. And then it turned into something, you know, I mixed it up a little bit and turned it into something that would fit into the 5 months. Yeah.
6,762 kilometers. Had anyone done it before and indeed since?
There are people who have done it. Nobody did it exactly precisely how I did. There's a chap from Port Elizabeth who's actually walked around the perimeter. His name is Russell Kearney, and I think more than once. There are some folk who've done it on horseback. Apparently, you know, I'm not sure if they actually did. There are a number of people who've run or walked the entire coastline. But I didn't, you know, especially when I did it, which was now a couple of years ago, I wasn't aware of anybody who had done the entire border, and certainly not in the, you know, in the short period of time that I had. I really put myself under time pressure to really suffer every day. It wasn't just like milling absent-mindedly around the edge whenever I felt like setting off. There was a daily target. There was a very, very strict goal. I spent enough time working in corporate for it not to be good enough to just absent-mindedly wander around the edges. I had to do it on target and within budget and all those good things.
And since then, what have you been keeping yourself occupied with? Because that was a decade ago.
That was a decade ago. Well, since then, there are a number of things that I've been keeping myself busy with. Because my child has now been at school in the last decade, it becomes quite tricky to take months and months at a time off. So one of the things that I've done is, with some friends of mine in the Eastern Cape, we started a wonderful initiative called Wild Women on the Run, where we train a group of women every year. We get them fit and ready to swim across rivers and run for days. And we normally run somewhere between 70 and 100 kilometers down the Wild Coast, and we raise large amounts of money. Not so much me, I'm really bad at that, but my friends and colleagues who join us are much more able to do that. So that has been the most wonderful thing that I've occupied myself with. I've also run a number of really long races, 100 milers. I ran a 400-kilometer nonstop race. We ran what is known as the pilgrimage run from Grahamstown to Knysna, which is a 600-kilometer run. So I've really been pushing myself with regard to distance. I've started adventure racing with my husband, Peter. And yeah, just obviously in between one has to earn a living. But I suppose my real dream, my big goal, if my body is still up to it when my child finishes school, is really to run the length of Africa. So not the traditional Cape to Cairo route, which I don't think is that exciting, but finding some astoundingly exciting route to take in the whole of Africa. That's my dream. That's what I would like to do next before I get too decrepit eventually one day.
How would you fund something like that?
It would be very difficult to fund. It would take a year. Obviously the visas and the getting in and out of every country would be one of the biggest expenses. So I would most certainly have to find a sponsor. Sadly, there's no Van Kets Trust Fund.
Kim, you mentioned raising money on the in the projects that you're doing now. What is that money used for?
Oh, okay. So we raised, when I did Try the Beloved Country, the idea was to raise funds and awareness for a school in East London called the Coral du Toit Centre. It is a school that teaches children who are born profoundly deaf to speak. So on Try the Beloved Country, I raised funds for the Coral du Toit Centre. The Wild Women on the Run project has raised funds for the same two charities for 10 years, and we've just added a third. And the prerequisite for selecting those initiatives were that they should be local, they should be in the Eastern Cape, and they should largely benefit women and children. And the one is called African Angels. It is a absolutely world-class school in the sort of rural outskirts of East London on the Wild Coast side, where children from disadvantaged backgrounds are given a world-class education. The other one is called Busfare Babies, which is an initiative in Hamburg on the coast between East London and Port Alfred. And basically it is run by a woman who is a midwife and who has started a program in that area helping with antenatal and postnatal care. And she became very aware of the fact that many women would give birth literally in a taxi on their way to hospital because it was impossible to get help locally, and it was very difficult to get to somewhere where they could be helped. So she has set up, she's trained midwives and set up a initiative in Hamburg that helps in those situations. And then our new charity is called the King's Home, and it is a program that cares for abandoned children, just near Cinsa, just outside of East London as well. So yes, so those are the three initiatives that we raise, that the Women of Wild Women raise money for.
So there's a definite purpose. But getting back to the run across Africa, or from not Cape to Cairo, as you said, but it'd be interesting to see what the planned run. Something like that would clearly be quite expensive, but secondly, it must also be an opportunity to truly help those charities and perhaps others. Is that the motivation?
It's part of the motivation, most definitely. But also, I think a huge part of the motivation, and this is true of my, my Try the Beloved Country, and also our Wild Women on the Run, is that there's this perception always that Africa, South Africa, the Wild Coast, is an unsafe place, especially for women, especially for women on their own. And I think that a large part of my motivation is really to debunk that myth, and to make people understand that, largely, certainly my experience in 30 years of running on my own, every corner of Southern Africa, that I have never experienced anything other than the most incredible goodwill from every single person that I've ever met. And, I'm not being naive, and I understand that sometimes bad things happen to good people. But I also think that there are incredible stories of kindness and humanity, and those stories need to be told. We're often told stories that are not positive stories. I want to share my stories, which I think are really stories of hope, and stories of courage, and stories that help women especially not to be fearful. And I think that's also a very big motivation, certainly also raising funds. And, absolutely honestly, also because it makes me feel alive to do those things. It's such a privilege to get, to turn something so unusual into one's work. And I'm so grateful for that opportunity. So there are many reasons. There's not, and honestly, I think if anybody ever says I'm running across Africa to raise funds for charity, it can never be the whole truth. There are many parts to the truth, and I think it's helpful for me to explore all those motivations.
So the BizNews conference at the end of the month, I'm sure that already from what you've told me now, there'll be people watching this video and saying, wow, I'm looking forward to it. But what more can they look forward to? What message are you going to be leaving us with?
Well, I don't want to steal my thunder now, Alec, Okay, so most certainly, I think primarily my story is one of hope, and it is a positive, good news South African story, and I think we really are very much in need of those stories. But secondly, I'm a storyteller, and I'm a lawyer, and I've worked for many years in the business world, and I think that largely, without being preachy, I want to use the stories of my journeys to make parallels to how we can be better at everything that we do. And so, there's so many things that I learned on my journey, and so many of those things are easy for me to forget when I get back home to reality. And so it's a privilege for me to get to speak at conferences like this, because it gives me an opportunity to remind me of those lessons that I learned when I'm sharing them with the delegates. So I think primarily I'm a storyteller. I tell stories that draw comparisons to our everyday lives, whatever those lives entail. And I think it's full of nuggets of just helpful stuff so that we can be the best that we can possibly be.
Kim von Ketz, author, athlete, storyteller, adventurer. We look forward to you opening the BizNews conference coming up at the end of August. And I'm Alec Hogg from biznews.com.